Hello everyone, my name is Luke, aka the Horror Nerd, and welcome back to YouTube's horror section. I hope you guys are doing well today. So in today's discussion video, we are going to be once again talking about the Resident Evil series. It's been a little while since the last time I have talked about this beloved franchise and one of my personal favorite horror franchises as well, so honestly, I was just kind of looking for an excuse to want to talk about Resident Evil again. I was just going to make a video talking about Resident Evil Requiem, but I decided to talk about this matter and this topic as well, which is why I will be talking about both instead. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now, I'm sure that most of you guys have probably already seen the trailers for Resident Evil 9. Before I get into the main topic of today's discussion video, I just want to give in my 2 cents for what I feel about Resident Evil 9 so far, so I'm about to do that right now. So, the first thing I want to say is Resident Evil going back to Raccoon City after it was wiped out during the Raccoon City incident, which was, of course, the narrative and storyline of Resident Evil 2 and 3. I could not have thought of a better idea. However, I will say one thing though. I was kind of hoping that some of the leaks about Resident Evil 9 were true. Not the one about the island. I'm not sure which one said it was going to take place on an island. I forgot which leaker it was. I think it was that one douchebag. I forgot his name. That one fucker who's always leaking shit, and most of the time his leaks are wrong. Sometimes they're right, but I forgot his name. That's not the leak I was hoping was true, though. I was hoping that the leak that stated that Resident Evil 9 was going to take place inside of, like, this abandoned small town, and the player was going to be hunted down by, like, Wendigos and Skinwalkers and other mythological creatures, and they will be able to shapeshift and pretend to be like normal NPCs. Now, to me, that sounded like a horror game of my dreams, or nightmares, I guess you can say. I was hoping that that would have actually been what Resident Evil 9 was going to be. I know that a lot of Resident Evil fans would disagree, and we're actually going to be talking about Resident Evil fans in a minute. That's what this video is mostly about, actually. But for me, personally, I'm the kind of Resident Evil fan that actually likes variety in this franchise. One of my favorite things about the Resident Evil franchise has actually been how each Resident Evil game kind of had something different going for it. Of course, you've got the Resident Evil games that are more about the classic ghouls and monsters of the series, like the zombies and the other mutated creatures of the series, and then you've got the other Resident Evil games like 4, 5, and 6, which had more aggressive zombie-like enemies but weren't really zombies. And then of course you've got 7 and 8 with the mold and the werewolves, and you guys know what I mean. But I actually like variety in the Resident Evil series. I always feel like making a sequel in a long-running franchise, or sequels in this case, having sequels that actually do feel distinct from each other, in my opinion, that goes a long way in making a franchise still feel fresh and also still brings new life into a long-running franchise, especially one that has been as long-running as the Resident Evil franchise. Because, of course, this series it started the survival horror genre, and it is still literally defining it somewhat. So, Resident Evil is definitely a very long-running franchise. And to be honest, like I said, I like variety. I like it when they try different things with the series. And one opinion I'm going to give right now, and I know that opinion is not really welcomed very nicely among the Resident Evil community, but I'm actually glad that they're not bringing back Leon. I'm sorry, but I'm glad that Leon's not returning. And the reason why is because, well, duh, we just had a game with him. Resident Evil 4 Remake was literally the last Resident Evil game to come out, and these suckers already won another game with Leon. Like, come on, bro. Like, No, no, no. We do not need Leon back for Resident Evil 9. Um, we wouldn't have gotten great characters like the father of the year and husband of the year, Ethan Winters. And Ethan Winters is one of the best Resident Evil characters, in my opinion. And again, I know that that's like blasphemy among Resident Evil fans, but I liked Ethan, okay? I'm sorry, but I liked Ethan. Yeah, he wasn't our favorite boulder punching asshole, and he wasn't our back flipping, one liner spewing superhero like Leon, and he wasn't a sexy super spy bitch in a red dress like Ada Wong. But that's one of the reasons why Ethan was such a great character. I liked Ethan not only because he was a new character, and obviously it's nice to get, new characters in a long-running franchise, because again, it's those new elements that help keep the franchise fresh despite being so, old. I liked Ethan because, first of all, like I just said, he's a new character, and also because he just was so relatable. Ethan Winters is the type of guy where I could actually really put myself into. Like, I could imagine being just like Ethan if I was in his situation. Unlike Leon, Chris, and all the other Resident Evil characters where you can't really relate to someone like Chris or especially Leon, and especially if you have an ugly mug like mine. So, I just related more to Ethan and I liked him more. And I also enjoyed the fact that he wasn't like a one-line spewing superhero like all the other characters, because even Chris has some one-liners, And of course, Ethan had one-liners too, and the thing about Ethan's one-liners when compared to the others is his one-liners were a lot more cheesier and weren't as funny, and that's another reason why he was so relatable, because he was just so average, and that's why I could relate to Ethan more than I could relate to... I can't relate to Leon at all. Like, I'm ugly as hell, and that man has every woman foaming at the mouth. So, I can't even really relate to someone like Leon. Sorry about that. Some guy was outside banging on his car door for some reason. He was probably fixing something, I don't know, but... Whew, the joys of being interrupted. Anyways, now that's out of the way. Yeah, like I was saying... where were we? Oh yeah, Ethan is a more relatable character than Leon or Chris. Now, I know that for some Resident Evil fans, like... that doesn't matter, and Ethan is still a horrible character because of how average he was. Yeah, personally, I like Ethan, that's why I liked him, because he was average. He was just a guy who just wanted to do the right thing, which was saving his wife in the first game he was in, and then saving his little girl in the last game he was in. So, I like Ethan. So, the fact that Leon is not going to be in this new Resident Evil game, I feel like that also leaves room for the new character as well, because let's be honest here, people. If Leon was in Resident Evil 9, even if you don't get to play as him, people are going to be way more interested in seeing what's going on with him than the main protagonist of Resident Evil 9. So, you got to admit that's a fair point, because it's true. I mean, I'm honest, like honestly, it's true. Like, who's gonna focus on the new character, especially because it's a female? They're gonna be way more interested in seeing what's been going on with Leon, and they're probably gonna want to play as Leon. The guy might be in his fucking 50s to mid 60s, and they're still gonna want to be roundhouse kicking monsters with them. Like, that's how fucking dumb so many Resident Evil fans are. Like, they think that Leon not being in Resident Evil 9 will be bad for the game, but it would actually be the opposite because of y'all. Because if Leon is going to be in Resident Evil 9, no one's going to be interested in the new character. And like I said, especially because we're playing as a female in this one. We're not playing as a dude. We're playing as some scared-looking girl. And since Leon is not going to be in Resident Evil 9, again, that also leaves room for Capcom to show us how this new character is going to be like. Apparently she's the daughter of like a character from Resident Evil Outbreak, and I did play a little bit of Outbreak because it's backwards compatible on the Series X, which I do have, and I have every Resident Evil game available to console, so I do have Outbreak. I just never finished it. But the point is, Leon not being in this game, I think that's actually a good thing because I like new characters. It's like I was saying earlier, I like variety in the Resident Evil series. I feel like the more variety we have in this franchise, the more fresh it will still continue to be despite how old it is. I mean, you look at other horror franchises that have been going on for almost just as long as Resident Evil, and they all feel so old and bland now. Just because the gameplay style of Resident Evil has not changed, it's those changes in the other aspects that still make this franchise feel fresh to me. At least to me, you know, and this is just my opinion. And again, I know opinions are not very welcomed in the Resident Evil community, but I'm gonna give them anyways. So, besides the new character, back to the setting of Resident Evil 9, I think it's a great idea. Going back to Raccoon City, a vaporized Raccoon City. I mean, this is some Chernobyl shit right here. I'm actually hoping that they'll do some, like, I don't know, like maybe some of the monsters that are still in Raccoon City, like they'll be like all fucked up and mutated, not just because of the whatever virus they're gonna have, but also because of the radiation sickness that's gonna be there because of course the Raccoon City was nuked and everything. Like, I hope Capcom goes crazy with the monsters in this game. And another thing I want to say is I'm also glad that they're also going back to a more darker tone Resident Evil game. Now, of course, we have not seen any gameplay from Requiem yet, other than just that little segment that we got a while back where where the main character is just following her mom until she gets killed. Spoilers, by the way, if you haven't already seen that trailer. But by the looks of it, first impressions, they're definitely going for a darker tone with Resident Evil 9, and I'm not surprised. I mean, it is being made by the same guy who made the masterpiece known as Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. So, and Resident Evil 7 is a great Resident Evil game. It is the scariest, most darkest Resident Evil game since the original came out all the way back in the 90s, as well as the remake that it got. So, for me, Resident Evil 7 was one of the best games in the series, actually, and a fuck ton better than that abomination Resident Evil 6. So, Resident Evil 9 being a more darker Resident Evil and going back to the horror roots, hopefully they'll still have the action in it as well, because here's the thing, as much as I loved Resident Evil 7, I do kind of like the action being in Resident Evil as well, but Resident Evil 7 was not short on action. Like, if you think Resident Evil 7 was just straight up 100% horror, then I think you might have played a different game. Because Resident Evil 7 definitely had action in it. It just didn't have as much as Resident Evil 6 did with all of its Michael Bay explosions and everything. So, you know, Resident Evil 9, hopefully, like, my hope for 9 is that I want a good narrative. I want a genuinely dark, claustrophobic atmosphere. And I also still do want the classic Resident Evil survival horror gameplay like every single one has had, except for, 5 and 6, of course. Honestly, I hope that 9 will be like a combination of Resident Evil 4 Remake and Resident Evil Village, because those are my two favorite games in the entire Resident Evil series, besides 7. For me, like, those three are, when I feel like playing a Resident Evil game, those are like the top three that I will always go for, either 7, 8, or 4 Remake. And as much as I adore Resident Evil 2 and 3, those are my three favorite Resident Evil games. There's just something about them, especially Village. I love Village just because of the gothic setting of being inside, like, that the village with the castle, of course, and everything, and the enemies. Like, I really love Village. Like, I really love Village. So I'm hoping, obviously, that 9 will kind of be like Village. I hope that they bring back some of the elements. The Stalker enemy that they're bringing back so far looks pretty cool. Although I do kind of hope to take it easy a little bit on the Stalkers. Let's talk about that for a minute in this discussion video, shall we? Now, when it comes to Stalkers in Resident Evil, I feel like it could go either one of two ways. It could either be really annoying, or it can be scary at first and then kind of get annoying. Now, when it came to Resident Evil 2, which was the game after 7 that kind of popularized the whole Stalker enemy, in the Resident Evil series, I feel like Mr. X was kind of annoying after a while in Resident Evil 2. He's fun to be chased by, that's the thing. Like, when you're trying to solve a puzzle, though, or when you're actually trying to do something and get something done in Resident Evil 2, I feel like Mr. X did kind of make things a little more irritating than they needed to be. I think Jack Baker was probably the best used stalker in the entire Resident Evil series, and I highly doubt that even Requiem will top what they managed to do with Jack Baker. Because the thing about Jack Baker is he was actually scary, first of all, and I don't think he got in the way as much as Mr. X did in Resident Evil 2. And not only that, but Resident Evil 7 also gave you more, it gave you more options on, dealing with Jack. Unlike Resident Evil 2, where if Mr. X showed up, you really had no choice but to just run away from him. In Resident Evil 7, when Jack Baker would show up, you would have a much better chance at knocking him over, so that way you can finish whatever puzzle you was doing. And of course, you had the block mechanic, so you wouldn't have to worry about dying in quick, gory, rapid succession like you do with Mr. X. And some will argue that that made Mr. X just all the more imposing, which it definitely did, but after a while, Mr. X did get annoying. And so did Nemesis in Resident Evil 3, even though Nemesis was barely even in that game. So when it comes to stalkers, I hope that they kind of take a moderate approach and don't have this new-looking stalker in Requiem to constantly be there just on my dick, just constantly chasing after me, because it does get kind of annoying after a while. It's like trying to shake an ex who just doesn't get the idea that you're done with her bitch ass and you don't want to go back with her. That's kind of what it's like with these Resident Evil stalkers. Like, they just won't leave you alone. Like, you have fun with them at first, and then after you're done being chased by them and, ooh, it's so scared, I'm really scared, I'm being chased by this thing. Like, yeah, after a while, like, when you've been chased for like 20 to 30 minutes and you just want to solve the damn puzzle or do whatever it is you have to do to progress, it does get kind of annoying. So, and you see, this is a thing that the Resident Evil series is getting really obsessed with. It's like every Resident Evil game has to have a stalker now. Hell, even Resident Evil Village had a stalker enemy, at least for the first segment. Spoilers if you don't know, basically Lady D was a stalker, and all the fucking gross people who were sexually obsessed with her were like, oh yeah, chase after me, mommy. Just keep chasing me, like... I mean, yeah, Lady D she's nice looking and all, but I never really got the gist over her. But anyways, besides the point, besides the core first impressions of Resident Evil 9, I think it looks like a great entry in the Resident Evil series. First impressions so far, it looks really good. I do, again, like I said, I do enjoy the fact that we are getting more horror baked into it, like Resident Evil is supposed to have. When we get to the final segment of today's discussion video, where we'll be talking about how divided this game's fan group is, or fan base, there are a lot of people out there who don't even want Resident Evil to have any horror in it anymore. Like, they want the monsters and everything and the story to still be there and the subject matter to still be there, but they don't want the game to have, like, actual horror in it anymore. And personally, like, I don't understand that. Like, for the Resident Evil fans who started playing these games and started with Resident Evil 4 or 5 or any of the other more action-centered Resident Evil games, like, you have to realize that this franchise was started as a survival horror series, not an action horror series. So when I hear, like, Resident Evil fans talk about how action Resident Evil is way better than the more horror-focused Resident Evil, personally, I don't understand it. First of all, because Resident Evil has always had a good blend of action and horror. Even like the older games, if you're fighting zombies and if you're shooting zombies, then that kind of counts as action. Yeah, it may not be as intense as it is in Resident Evil 4, where you're fighting the Ganados or the people in Resident Evil 5, but or the ones in 6, but you get the idea. Like, taking the horror out of Resident Evil 100% is incredibly stupid. So, for the Resident Evil fans out there who just don't want horror to be the main focus of this franchise anymore, respectfully, I think you're an idiot. So, yeah, besides that, Resident Evil 9 does look really good. Besides everything I just stated, I also do like how we can switch between first person and third person. I see Capcom has got that, they got the idea from Village. It worked out in Village just right. See, this is how Capcom should be doing it. You should be adding things to please both fans. You've got things to please the more horror fans like myself who like the more horror-focused Resident Evil, and then you've got action and third person for the Resident Evil fans who like the more traditional Resident Evil, who like the action and the third person, because a lot of people were complaining about first person. Like, I was like seeing a lot of people being like, I hope it's on first person again. Like, again, like, this fucking fan base, man. Anyways, now that we're done talking about what I think about Resident Evil 9 so far, do I have anything left to say? Yes, I do. When it comes to the monsters, this is where I have some pretty high expectations. I want Capcom, like I said earlier when I first started filming, I want Capcom to go crazy with the monster design here. I want them to go down a path that makes Silent Hill look like a fucking Disney franchise. I want there to be some extremely deranged, fucked up looking monsters in this game. Because the thing is, if Resident Evil 9 is going to be the darkest new entry in the Resident Evil series, then we gotta have some nightmarish creatures. Especially considering the fact that there are a lot of other horror games coming out this year. So Resident Evil has to reclaim its throne in 2026 by having the scariest monsters, by having some actual scary looking monsters. So I want there to be really good monsters in this game. I want there to be good gameplay, of course, and I want the monsters to actually be a threat in this game. Now, what I mean by that is I actually want the monsters to not only be scary in terms of looks, but also in terms of what they do and how they will attack the player, their behavior. Like, put some Alien Isolation type shit in this game. Like, make the monsters actually scary. Give them better AI. I don't know, just do something, Capcom, to actually make me fear what I will be fighting in this game. I don't want this to be another Resident Evil game where I'm just blasting away as soon as I get a better gun with better ammo. I want the monsters to actually be scary as hell in this game. I want Resident Evil 9 to be the first time a Resident Evil game actually has me turning my pants brown, if you know what I mean. If I'm not already wearing brown pants. Anyways, now that we are done talking about this segment of Resident Evil 9, you guys got my opinion on how I feel so far about it. Let's get into the final segment of today's discussion video. Alright, so now the final segment of this video. Resident Evil has the most divided and kind of toxic fan base. Let's get straight into it. Let's just get straight into it. Now, I became a Resident Evil fan, not really recently, but, you know, I've been a Resident Evil fan for maybe not as long as some of you guys, and maybe, like, I don't know, maybe I just got a bad first impressions, but, bro, the Resident Evil community is toxic as fuck. I mean, let's be honest, like, if you know, you know. Like, these guys are at each other's throats as soon as someone brings up their own opinion about one of the games or just the franchise as a whole. Now, it's no surprise that the fan base is as divided as it is, and that's because Capcom has given us two types of Resident Evil games, so obviously you're going to have separate sides of the fan base that enjoy specific entries of the Resident Evil series that are unlike previous installments, right? So, in simple words, you've got the more horror-centered Resident Evil games like 1 and 2 and 3 to a certain extent, as well as 7 and 8. Or the Revelations games, which most people don't remember. And then you've got the more action-centered Resident Evil games, which is, of course, 4, 5, and 6. So, because of the fact that we have two types of Resident Evil games, we've got the horror-centered ones, we've got the action-centered ones, there are also different parts of the community. It's almost like factions, really. You've got the old heads who just like Resident Evil being 100% survival horror. Then you've got the ADHD kids who like constant, nonstop action with Resident Evil. And then you've got guys like me who just enjoy elements of both. Like, for me, I like all the Resident Evil games. Like, I got into this franchise not because of the fact that it was primarily survival horror. That was one of the main reasons, but not the primary one. I got into Resident Evil because I thought it was a great franchise. I've been wanting to really get into it ever since I played Resident Evil 7 and Revelations, which were my first Resident Evil games. I immediately loved the subject matter of the series. I loved the concept of it. I loved the fact that I was fighting horrifying abominations that were basically mutated humans. I mean, the idea that the monsters that we fight in these games was once a human being is terrifying to me. So I love the subject matter of Resident Evil. So I'm the type of guy that loves all of the games. There was Resident Evil games that, despite being bad and despite me hating some of them, I still did love them at the same time. Like, for example, yes, I did call Resident Evil 6 an abomination, but even Resident Evil 6 had things about it that I could actually love and appreciate. Hell, I actually hope they bring back some elements from 6 into Resident Evil Requiem. More specifically, I like how in 6 there was just so much more gameplay options. Like, Resident Evil 6 just had such unrestricted freedom with its controls. So every Resident Evil game had something that I could appreciate about it. There's not a single Resident Evil game where I can say, yeah, this game just completely sucks and I hate it. I loved almost every Resident Evil game except for that Umbrella Corps game, and I don't think anyone liked that one. Or the Resident Evil Resistance, despite how much potential it had. Another asymmetrical horror game that failed because they couldn't put enough effort into actually balancing it or making it a good experience. Anyways, we already made that video. Back to what I was saying. This community is divided as fuck. Like, these guys, like I said, they are constantly at each other's throats. So first of all, you've got the type of Resident Evil fans, and this is my favorite. You've got the type of Resident Evil fans who, sorry about that, excuse me, they hate the remakes. They hate the remakes. Now, when it comes to this argument, I actually could understand because I gotta say, y'all, now that they actually brought back the original Resident Evil 2 and 3 on the PS5, and after I did get a chance to play them, the remakes do kind of feel a bit lackluster. So I can understand why we have these 50 to 60-year-old men within the Resident Evil series with their half-balding cholesterol asses who are constantly shitting on the remakes and shitting on the modern fans who love the remakes and never got a chance to play the original. I can understand it, but again, it all goes back to just how fucking divided and toxic this fan base is. I mean, Resident Evil is a great franchise, so you would think that the fans would all be able to come together and appreciate just how goated this franchise is together, because at the end of the day, this franchise belongs to every Resident Evil fan. If you're a fan of the franchise, then it's your franchise. You know, if you're a fan of the more action-focused Resident Evil games, this is still your franchise. The story from the more horror-centered Resident Evil games that you don't like for some reason, they're still canon, and the story is still a part of the action Resident Evil games that you love. So, either way, like, it's a shame how this fan base is so toxic to one another. I mean, I've seen toxic fan bases in different video game franchises. God knows that Silent Hill has the same problem, but when it comes to Resident Evil, I mean, this is like some fucking Battle Royale type shit. But like I was saying before, like, you've got the old heads, right? You've got the old heads who are constantly shitting on the remakes. They think they're terrible games, and keep in mind, these motherfuckers haven't even played the remakes. Like, all they do is either watch a couple of gameplay videos, and their favorite thing to do, is to go to a video, whether it be a review or just a video talking about how good one of the Resident Evil remakes is, and they'll leave their shitty little comment talking about how the remake is terrible and how it's a downgrade and how it's this and that, and they'll even say that it's woke. Bro, you have no fucking idea what a woke game is. If you want to have a woke ass game, go play something like The Last of Us 2 or any Last of Us game where there's just a bunch of lesbians and gay guys all over. Hell, I'm surprised the fucking clickers in that game aren't gay themselves. That's actually a woke ass game. Now, when it comes to Resident Evil remakes, there's nothing woke, even slightly, about the Resident Evil remakes. You want a woke game? Go play Last of Us or anything like that. Go play that fucking Saints Row game. Like, if you think the Resident Evil remakes are woke, I don't even... I think these old ass men, I think what they're doing is they know that a lot of gamers hate when a video game is woke. So what they'll do is they'll claim that these Resident Evil remakes are woke, and they'll just hope that the people reading their comments will actually believe it, and they'll just immediately hate the remakes and listen to them and believe that the remakes are actually woke. Because they know how much we hate video games that are woke, or anything woke for that matter, or anything that has forced LGBTQ propaganda. The Resident Evil games have none of that. There's no LGBT bullshit in none of the Resident Evil games. So when these old ass men are saying that, oh my god, it's woke, it's this, it's that, like, bro, you're fucking 65 years old. You're a fucking relic. You're as outdated as the Resident Evil games from your time. Like, get the fuck out of here. Like, these assholes will literally have arguments with people, and I'm surprised their dementia-having asses will even remember 10 minutes later what they're even talking about. So, you know, these old-ass men with their fucking high cholesterol, balding-headed asses, like, the remakes are not woke, first of all, and second of all, yes, despite the fact that they are kind of a downgrade, because they do have some missing content, the Resident Evil remakes are still a great way to experience the reimagined Resident Evil games, because that's what every horror game remake is. It's just a reimagined, better version of a horror game that already came out and was already good once upon a time, but is now not so good because of how outdated it is in terms of both gameplay and story. That's what a remake is even made for in the first place. Remakes are made for horror games to have modernized gameplay and also address outdated elements of the story, whether it be dialogue, something simple as dialogue, or just little things in the story that don't make a lot of sense, or just things that don't really, things that are not really, still, how do I put this, just outdated in the modern era. They don't hold up. That's what I was looking for. They don't hold up. That's what I was looking for. That's what a remake is for. Now, if you think that the older games are superior to the remakes, then that's fine. Like, and that's another thing I don't understand about this fucking community. Like, nobody is forcing you to enjoy what you simply do not like. So why do you have to act like the other person or the people you're arguing with are doing that? Why do you have to act like they're doing that? Why do you have to act like you literally need to argue and fight with other people just because they don't have the same opinion as you and don't have the same agreements? You should be glad that people have their own opinions. I mean, imagine if 90% of us were all the same. Imagine how fucking boring we would be. I like it when people have different opinions than me, because it makes having conversations with them and debates so much more interesting. How could you have conversations with people if they have the same opinions as you? I mean, it's okay when people have similar opinions or the same opinion, but like, these fuckers in the Resident Evil community, either you have the same opinion as them or you don't, and you're an asshole. That's not how it works. That's not how it's supposed to work. Like, and besides these old ass men talking about how the remakes are trash, they still think that the older Resident Evil games hold up. They don't. I'm sorry, but they don't. I mean, I'm not going to say that the older games are bad because they don't hold up. They're always going to be legendary classics among not just the Resident Evil series, but the survival horror video game genre in general. These are the games that are part of survival horror's history, and they deserve all your respect just because of that fact. So no, I'm not going to sit here and shit on the older Resident Evil games and say that they're straight up bad now. They're outdated as fuck, sure, but they're not bad. But these idiots still think that they hold up. They don't, okay? The original Resident Evil 4, that shit doesn't hold up. That shit doesn't hold up. That game aged about as good as the milk on a homeless person's wall, if he even had a house. That shit aged about as well as, I don't know, my childhood innocence, which is completely gone now because of how miserable life is nowadays. I'm sorry, I don't know where that came from. I was kind of just thinking of something to say. But yeah, Resident Evil does not hold up, okay? The older games don't hold up. And all these old-ass men, like, they could go on as much as they want. But it's not going to make a difference. Now, the second type of Resident Evil fan, which is pretty much the same as the old-ass men, these are the guys that just want Resident Evil to just be straight-up horror. I mean, it pretty much is the same as these old-ass men, but there are some other people among the Resident Evil community that aren't old-ass men, and they just want Resident Evil to be a straight-up horror franchise only. Now, here's the problem with that. Resident Evil was never a straight-up primary horror only franchise. It's survival horror. You can't really want Resident Evil to just focus primarily on the horror aspects. That's not what any survival horror game is supposed to do. Yes, horror is one of the main focuses, but survival and action are kind of the same. I mean, in every survival horror game, there is combat. Except for the ones like Outlast and Amnesia, and those don't really even count, because that's a different type of survival horror. If we're looking at survival horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Evil Within, Alan Wake, Dead Space, Alone in the Dark, etc., like, all of these games have action. Even the ones that focus more on the horror aspects, even the more horror-focused Resident Evil games do have action, because, for example, the scariest Resident Evil game in the series, which is of course Resident Evil 7, when you're fighting a bunch of mold monsters and when you're literally popping their heads like watermelons with a shotgun, you can't really say that that's not action. If a survival horror game, which most do, have combat, which, like I just said, most of them do, because survival horror has combat. Nearly every survival horror game does. So for the horror fans out there who just want Resident Evil to focus more on the horror aspects, it's already been doing that for the most part, but you can't expect a Resident Evil game to have like 99% horror and like 1% something else. At that point, the game would just be trying to be like Visage or Outlast or Amnesia. Like, if you're the kind of horror fan that just wants a straight-up horror series and just straight-up horror and not a lot else, then I don't even think Resident Evil might even be the franchise for you. Hell, there is two types of survival horror, just like how there are two types of Resident Evil game. There's the survival horror that focuses more primarily on horror and just running away and hiding and sneaking around. That's Outlast, Amnesia, Layers of Fear, etc. And then there's the more traditional survival horror that is always going to have some action sprinkled into it. So for the Resident Evil fans who are claiming to be Resident Evil fans, you can't really have a Resident Evil game that's focusing just on the horror. It's never been that way. It never has been. Like, none of the Resident Evil games have ever been like that. Even the one that came out all the way back in 1991, Resident Evil, the first Resident Evil, you fight zombies in that game. You're fighting zombies and you're solving puzzles. But since you're shooting and killing zombies and surviving, yes, it is a more horror-focused entry, but there's still action in it. Every Resident Evil has some action in it. There was never one that didn't. So, I don't understand what these people want when they complain that Resident Evil is going back towards the action and there's too much action. People were complaining that Village wasn't scary like 7 was because there was more guns and there was more combat. Resident Evil 8 was just as scary as 7. Like, I don't know what people are talking about. I genuinely don't. Like, Resident Evil 7 may be the scariest game in the series, but the fucking baby fetus thing in 8, that's scarier than nearly everything in Resident Evil 7. Almost. Like, 7 and 8 are the scariest games in the entire Resident Evil franchise. And 9 will hopefully be the exact same. But despite being the scariest, 7 and 8 still had action. Maybe didn't have as much as 6, like I said, or 5 or 4, but you can't have a Resident Evil game that doesn't have action. Action not being in Resident Evil at least a little bit, which all of them did have except for the more action-focused ones, that's like having a GTA game that only has specific types of vehicles and no other types. Like, that's like having a GTA game where you can't steal helicopters or aircraft or, boats or things. Like, doesn't work. That's like having a Call of Duty game that only has shotguns. If you take away the action from a Resident Evil game and you take away the combat is the action pretty much, then that's not even Resident Evil. You essentially want Resident Evil to be Outlast, and that's just stupid. So, no. Those types of Resident Evil fans are just dumb. Now for the third type, and this is pretty much the opposite, and these are the guys that just want Resident Evil to just be 100% action focused. Again, I'm the type of guy that likes it when it's just right. I like Resident Evil games. I like all of them, of course, but I like the ones specifically that have both action and horror. I like the ones that have a good blend of it. Now, for the ADHD kids, as I like to call them, because they can't keep their fucking focus on something for longer than 20 minutes unless they're doing something badass and cool. And it's ironic because I have ADHD myself, and my ADHD is really, really bad. And I am able to keep some of my focus on these games at least. I mean, I play every horror game, okay? I play slow-paced and fast-paced, okay? So besides the point, but these type of Resident Evil fans that just want Resident Evil to be a straight-up action series with a bunch of badass moments and cheesy ridiculousness, I mean, it has been a big part of the franchise for a while, and I don't got a problem with it. But if you want the franchise to be just that, and not have any horror in it whatsoever, or just so little horror that it barely even feels like a horror game anymore, then just like the guys who want too much horror, you are an idiot. Like, for the people who like Resident Evil 6, for example, and think it's one of the best Resident Evil games, like, if you honestly think Resident Evil 6 is one of the best Resident Evil games, that's your fucking opinion, but it's an opinion that I think is very dumb, okay? And that's just my own opinion about your opinion. Like, Resident Evil 6 was not even survival horror whatsoever. Hell, I don't even think you could call Resident Evil 6 action horror at that point. I mean, Resident Evil 6 felt more like one of those action games that just had horror sprinkled into it in its monster design or some of its gameplay moments. Like, Resident Evil 6 was not even really a horror game at that point. So, for those of you who think that Resident Evil should just focus only on its action and its cheesiness and goofiness, I don't even know what to say to you at that point. Like, this is why I call y'all ADHD kids. Because you have an inability to enjoy something that doesn't have you occupied with a bunch of action every 5 to 10 minutes. I mean, because these same people, they don't like the more horror-focused Resident Evil because either it's too boring for them or they think it's watered down when compared to the more action-focused games that they like. And no shit, yeah, it's going to feel watered down because it's a more horror-focused entry. You see, honestly, in my opinion, I think Capcom should just either blend both of these things together or, I don't know, one entry should be more horror focused and the other should be more action focused, because I'm pretty sure even the guys who like more horror focused Resident Evil should be able to enjoy a more action focused entry every now and then. And I'd like to say the same thing about the more action focused fans of Resident Evil, but these guys don't even like they don't like the more slower pace. They don't like the more horror focused stuff. They don't like the more slow pace. And I guess, I mean, whatever. I don't know. But this game's community is just so fucking divided. So for those of you who do like more action-focused Resident Evil, one thing you should also realize is Resident Evil 6 nearly killed this franchise. So you have to understand that you are a minority, because more Resident Evil fans prefer either action with horror blended together like Resident Evil 4, or some of the buffoons who just want Resident Evil to be a straight up horror franchise. There's still more of them than there is of you. So, you know, for all of the fans who are, you know, fans of the more focused on action rather than horror and survival aspects of Resident Evil, you're part of a minority. So no offense to you, and don't let me be an asshole and don't let me sound like one to you, but your opinion is kind of irrelevant, actually, because, like I said, Resident Evil 6 nearly had this franchise in the grave. Resident Evil 7 is what helped bring this franchise back into the spotlight. A lot of people did not like the approach that Resident Evil 6 went into. There's a reason why so many people didn't like it, and that's not even an opinion, that's just facts. And I am aware that Resident Evil 7 was actually supposed to be another action-focused game like Resident Evil 6 was. But if that did actually happen, and if Capcom did make another heavily focused action Resident Evil game, I'm pretty sure it would have been another failure like Resident Evil 6 was. Because Resident Evil 6 was considered a failure. That game was a flop. I'm pretty sure it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, and even if I am wrong about it being a straight up flop, I am not wrong about the fact that a lot of people did not like Resident Evil 6. So even if I am wrong, I still stand corrected on the fact that Resident Evil 6 was a heavily disliked game. So if Resident Evil 7, the original script for Resident Evil 7, actually was an action-oriented Resident Evil game, it still would have been considered a bad game because a lot of people didn't like it. You see, the people who like the more action-focused Resident Evil games need to understand that it's not those who just want Resident Evil to be a straight-up horror franchise that don't like the more action-focused Resident Evil games. It's people like me who like it when Resident Evil is what it was always supposed to be, a blend of survival horror and some action. You take both of these things and you combine them together to make a better experience for it in the end. And that's what makes the other Resident Evil games that isn't Resident Evil 5 or 6 so good. There's this one dude I like to watch on YouTube, and he's like, Resident Evil 4 had the same amount of action as 5 and 6, and honestly, no it did not. No it did not. Yes, Resident Evil 4 had way more action than any of the other Resident Evil games that came out prior to it, but it had nowhere near as much as action as 5 and 6 did. It had nowhere near as much. Okay, because 4 still had those dark horror elements and the grotesque monsters that is part of Resident Evil's subject matter, until it started getting watered down and downgraded in Resident Evil 5 and 6. So Resident Evil 4 was still a horror game, despite having a lot more action. Resident Evil 5 is where it started falling apart, and 6 is where it went batshit crazy, and pretty much it became Call of Duty instead of Resident Evil. So for the idiots out there who think that Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 are all the same in terms of how much action they had, no. No. Resident Evil 4 is still one of the more action-oriented Resident Evil games, but it still had enough horror in there to still be considered at least a survival horror game, and a horror game at heart. Resident Evil 5 also did have a decent amount of horror elements, but that's when Capcom started getting way too comfortable with having more action than horror. And that's what kind of fucked up the Resident Evil franchise until 6 came out and really fucked up the franchise. So yeah, now you see, this is why this community is so divided. You've got people who are sensible like me, and then you've got the people who want more action and the people who want more horror. And then you've got the old-ass people who just don't like remakes because their miserable asses can't deal with the fact that their older fan-favorite games are now becoming obsolete. So, the point is, I'm trying to make here is, all of you guys suck, okay? You all suck. I called out each and every one of you, and I will happily await your counter-argument, if you even have one. Go ahead and leave your comments down below, and if you want to take it further than that, then you can contact me on either PlayStation or Facebook. Because the Horror Nerd is always down for a discussion, and is always down for a debate. Hell, I'll put it right here on the channel if you want. I like debating, it's fun. I don't take it seriously, I don't get toxic, I'm not like that. I'm not that kind of person, so I don't mind debating, but I think y'all suck. Like, the Resident Evil community, if you enjoy more action-focused Resident Evil games, that's fine. So why do you have to shit on the people who like the more blended Resident Evil games? Like, if the people who like more horror sprinkled into their Resident Evil games and the ones who like more action, if they're just gonna be going at it, then that's fine. I mean, they're both wrong. They both want Resident Evil to be something that it isn't. Because like I said before, every Resident Evil game has combat. Combat equals action. When you're shooting a gun at a monster, that doesn't equal slow-paced horror. If there's combat, then there's action. Even some of the scariest, most terrifying survival horror games that have combat still equals action, because combat equals action, okay? That's just the way it is. If there's combat, if you're fighting monsters, if you're collecting ammo, if you're getting new guns, if you're blowing shit up with a grenade launcher, which most horror games do have, or burning some monster's ass off with a flamethrower, guess what? That means that there's some action in there. That's just the way it is. So yeah, the Resident Evil fanbase, it's so fucking toxic. And it's so divided. I mean, I guess there's a reason why it's divided, because you've got people who enjoy different types of Resident Evil games, which is all fine and dandy, but the reason why it's a problem here is because the community is against one another. Like, Resident Evil fans can never seem to get along. They're always arguing about something, whether it's another remake coming out, or it's a Resident Evil game that isn't focusing on one of the elements that they prefer. Like, they're always arguing about something. Why can't the fans who like the more action-focused Resident Evil games try and enjoy one of the more horror-focused ones? And why can't one of the other fans who like the more horror-focused Resident Evil games try and enjoy one of the more action-focused? Yes, I didn't like Resident Evil 6. I think it's a bit of a shitty game. Here's how I feel about 5 and 6. In my opinion, Resident Evil 5 and 6 are not even true Resident Evil games. To me, they're almost like spin-offs set within the Resident Evil series, and I still enjoy them just because of the fact that they're part of the franchise and they have a story that is continuing the overall narrative of the series. So I like them just because of those elements. Like I said, there's not a single Resident Evil game that I straight up hate. I hate them a little bit, but not straight up. Like, not 100% enemies. So yeah, the Resident Evil community, it just fucking sucks. Honestly, it just really sucks. Like, y'all are just... you guys are just arguing Battle Royale warship type garbage. Like, y'all are just at each other's throats. Y'all are constantly arguing. I mean, it's so toxic. Hell, y'all will say horrible things about one another that goes beyond the Resident Evil series, and y'all will start insulting each other personally. Like, how fucking miserable and immature do y'all have to be to go from having an argument about a video game franchise to literally insulting one another with personal, childish insults? Like, how fucking stupid do y'all gotta be? It's disgusting how y'all act. It really is. Like, I don't even want to be considered a part of the Resident Evil community. Like, hell, I'm already an introvert. I already don't like being around people. So, to be honest, like, as of this moment, as much as I adore the Resident Evil franchise, I don't consider myself part of y'all's community because y'all are just way too whack, honestly. Like, as of right now, the Horror Nerd is not part of the Resident Evil community, okay? I'm part of the horror community. I enjoy horror games, I love the overall horror genre, and I don't give a fuck what y'all have to say. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to Resident Evil Requiem. So, for the dumbass Resident Evil fans who want another Resident Evil 6, y'all can go fuck yourself. And for the ones who wanted more horror and who are now shitting on the guys who wanted a more action-focused Resident Evil game, y'all can enjoy your war. Enjoy your little war. Enjoy your scuff. Enjoy your little war in this community that you guys are both a part of. My God. Anyways, thank you guys so very much for watching. I know this kind of turned into a rant video at the end, which I did not intend to, but I just started getting kind of annoyed just talking about this shit, so I hope you guys enjoyed either way, and if you stuck by all the way till the end, thank you so very much for hearing what I had to say and just hearing me ramble about this. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. If you guys enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if this video earned that from you. I hope it did, and if not, then leave down any criticism below, and I will definitely take it to heart. Criticism can be used to improve, not to dishearten people. People look at criticism the wrong way, so I take what I can get. Criticism is a good thing, so whatever you guys think needs to be updated or changed on my channel, whatever I can do better, I know I can always do better, let me know down below in the comments. I love talking with you guys in general. Like, don't be a stranger. Please actually leave a comment down below. I don't have any friends. So yeah, I love talking with you guys. I love talking with my fans, my community, my subscribers, whatever. And yeah, let me know. What do you think? I love to hear your thoughts and opinions about the topic that was discussed in today's discussion video. So yeah, let me know down below in the comments. Again, if you stuck by till the end, thank you so very much. You're a real one for hearing me ramble for over 34 minutes. I greatly appreciate that, and I greatly appreciate you guys. I love y'all so much. And this was Luke, aka the Horror Nerd, the biggest horror nerd and biggest horror fan on YouTube, signing off. I will see you guys in the next discussion video, next gameplay video, whatever it may be. I will see you guys next time right here on YouTube's horror section. So take care, y'all, and peace out.